Hello, everyone. On today's podcast episode, I'm going to talk about the word exists and, the hidden symbolisms within the word. You know, in many other podcast episodes, I've talked about, existence and non-existence before, right? And how, atheists use words like, God doesn't exist and God exists, or it's impossible for God to exist without truly understanding, the real meaning of what existence really means. They don't understand life at all. Because they don't understand life, they're incapable of truly understanding how the world works. Because they don't understand how the world works, they can confidently make claims like God doesn't exist without truly understanding what existence truly means. They make claims, you know, and they expect us to just accept their claims. And we just can't, because they don't understand how the world works. Because their minds are not capable of understanding how the world works. They can confidently make claims without truly understanding what they're saying. So let me tell you what existence is. For something to exist, something must also not exist. For existence to exist, non-existence must also exist. For God to create existence, God must also create non-existence as well. And in this episode, I'm going to talk about the hidden symbolisms within the word existence. So let's break down the word existence real quick. The word existence, right? Or the word exist is what? Exist. The letter X is what? Part of the X chromosome. It's, another word for the X chromosome. The letter X also means 10 in Roman numerals, right? And the word, ist or ist in exist, right? The word ist in exist means man. Let me give you an example of what, when you use the word ist in most languages, in the English language, you always refer to man. Theist, the ist, ist. Biologist, chemist, physicist, scientist. So you see where the is in these words? Ist means man. So when you say you exist, you're saying you're an X-man. And what's an X-man? Many people have watched the movie X-Men, right? An X-man is a mutant. So how does this all tie into it? If you don't understand how, science works, science states that rocks, water, and many of these, chemicals are not alive. Many of these atoms are not alive. Yet the human body, life is made up of these atoms, right? These atoms are not alive, but yet human life exists through these atoms, right? That tells you that human, life itself, it's an anomaly. In the world we live in, where everything is not alive, life itself is an anomaly. Life itself are mutants. We are mutants. We shouldn't exist, but yet we do. This planet Earth is filled with so much non-life, so much non-biological, things. We have rocks, we have the entire Earth is not alive. In the scientific view of the world, the entire Earth is not alive. Mars is not alive. These planets are not alive. Yet strangely, we are. Life is alive, right? Life is alive, yet the planets around us are not alive. The very planet we're living in is not alive, yet we are alive. And the things that make up this planet are the same thing that make up our body. Protons, neutrons, and electrons. That tells you what? That tells you that we are an anomaly. We humans, we life. Life itself is what? A mutation in the world. So we are X-Men. Life itself exists because life is X-Man. X-ist means X-Man. And the only thing that can know that it exists is life. You need intelligence in order to know that you exist, right? From a scientific point of view, atoms are not intelligent. They are not alive, so they cannot know that they exist. Humans and all, life is alive, so we know that we exist. So in order for us to, in order for you to know that you exist, you must first be alive. You must first be an X-Man. You must first be the mutation in the world. In a world filled with non-existent materials, we humans, we life are the mutations. We are the X-Men. We are the mutants of the world. There's so much symbolism in this world where everything in this world ties together. Everything is connected, even our very language that we use. Nothing in this world exists by accident. Not even the creation of of the world itself, and not even the creation of life. Everything is connected. It's like one massive clock. We're living inside a massive, intelligent being called God. And there's another example. The word X, right? The number X in exists, right? That number is what? 1 and 0. 1 signifies finite, and 0 signifies infinity. Why? Because there are infinite points, in a circle. There are infinite points in a circle. That's why 0 signifies infinity. 0 also signifies nothing. Do you know why 0 signifies nothing and also infinity? Because when everything exists, nothing does. When everything exists, everything becomes non-existent. When everyone is tall, no one is tall. When everyone is short, no one is short. When everything is in the past, there's no such thing as the past. If everything occurred in at just one point in time in the past, then the word past no longer has a meaning. When everything is moving in the same direction, at the same speed, nothing moves. This is how duality works. This is one of the patterns of duality, is that when everything has the same pattern, when everything has the same, traits, nothing does. So if everything exists, when everything exists, nothing exists. In order for you to create existence, non-existence must also exist. When everything, doesn't exist, something exists. These two are one. Let me give you a different example of it. Right? If you stand forward, right? Just stand up. Stand up and look in front of you. You will notice that there's a left side of you and the right side of you, right? There's your left and your right. If you turn around, you will notice what? That your left and your right has switched. Do you know why that happens? Is because left and right are two sides of the same coin. Perspective determines what is left and what is right. When you're looking forward, your left and right, is left and right. When you're looking backwards, your left becomes your right and your right becomes your left. Perspective determines what exists and what doesn't. From God's perspective, we exist, right? No, from our perspective, we exist. From God's perspective, only God exists. Because God is omnipresent. Because God is everything. Because God is infinite. Only God exists. But because God is infinite, from our point of view, God no longer exists. We cannot see God anywhere. We cannot see God anywhere because God is everything. That's how, existence and non-existence work. When you become infinite, you no longer exist. When you become everything, you no longer exist. So existence, right? 1 and 0 tells you that, 1 and 0 together means existence and non-existence together. Finite and infinite together. It tells you duality itself. It's the very concept of duality. The X in existence, right, signifies duality. Finite and infinite. 1 and 0. So every single word in this world also has hidden meanings within it. Every single, letter inside the words in every language has a hidden meaning why it's there. There are no coincidences in this world. Every single thing in this world is in place for a reason. The Bible says in the beginning was the Word. That should tell you that words are very important to God. If you don't understand the hidden symbolisms in words, you will never understand the world itself. X-ist. X-men. X-ist. 1 and 0 is X. 1 and 0 signifies duality itself. Is the very definition of duality. Finite and infinite. These are these are two equal and opposite pairs. Duality. Existence is 1, non-existence is 0. Right? I means, I and O. I is 1, is Roman numerals for 1, right? O is what? 0. On your light switch, when you press when you press 1, it means on, right? It means you exist. When you press 0, it's off. I and O, that's 10. So that symbol, the X symbol, 1 and 0, it's even used on computers as well. It's not on switches, not only on switches, but also on computers. If you're someone who invests in cryptocurrencies, you know that blockchain, the blockchain technology starts with, Ethereum starts with IO, IOX, then, a bunch of, serial numbers. The wallet address is, starts with, IO. You wonder why there's an IO? Well, it's based off computers. Computers have a, input and output or IO, mechanism that, that governs how computers work and memories and all that. Not to mention that, computers are written in 1s and 0s, existence and non-existence. 1 is 0. 1 is 0, have you watched the movie Matrix where, you see them 1 and 0, 1s and 0s falling down? Yeah, that's how computers work. I forgot, it's been a while since I studied computers, but I think I read when I was learning programming, I read somewhere where, they talk about computer memories, how, everything is stored in 1s and 0s, different, the different combinations of 1s and 0s create, how computers work. The entire computer runs off 1s and 0s, different combinations of 1s and 0s. Even color is stored on the computer using 1s and 0s. So the word 1 and, the letters 1 and 0 are 10. Existence, has a key, place in the world itself. We use it on a daily basis. We use the number 10 on a daily basis without us realizing that. 1 and 0, or duality, is how the world functions. The world works off 1 and 0. The world works off existence and non-existence. 1 signifies existence or on. 0 signifies non-existence or off. 1 signifies finite and 0 signifies infinity. Because when everything is, because God is infinite, God no longer exists. This is why, you can't divide by 0. and everything divided by, everything can go into zero, and I forgot how it works. It's like you can't divide by zero because you can't divide by infinity. The things that our number system works off the fact that zero and infinity are the same thing. We don't know it, but hidden behind our very language itself tells you that zero and infinity are the same thing. When something is infinite, it no longer exists in our eyes. We cannot see infinity. We humans are finite creatures. Because we're finite creatures, infinity is not something our mind is capable of understanding. Because our mind isn't capable of understanding the very concept of infinity. Infinity doesn't exist in our eyes. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Between 0 and 1, I've used this example many times. Between 0 and 1, there are infinite numbers between 0 and 1. But because our mind is incapable of understanding infinity, infinity doesn't exist. We ignore infinity because our minds are incapable of, fully grasping it. Between 0 and 1, between the numbers 0 and 1, there are infinite points. There are infinite numbers between there. There's 0, there's 0.1, there's 0.001, there's 0.00001, there's 0.0000001. It just goes on infinitely. But yet, because our minds are incapable of functioning with infinity, we have to break things down into a finite amount of numbers. We can only go from 0 to 0.1 to 0.2 to 0.3 to 0.4 to 0.5 all the way to 0.9, and then we get to 1. We ignore all the infinities in between these numbers because infinity, from our finite point of view, infinity doesn't exist. We have to ignore the infinities in between numbers because our minds are incapable of understanding infinity. Our minds are incapable of counting to infinity. So when something is infinite, it no longer exists. God is infinite. That's why you don't see God anywhere. Here's another, example of X. The X chromosomes, right? Because we're X-Men, right? Guess what? Humans, our genes are not traced by our fathers, but by our mothers. You know that? Scientists show that, biologists have shown that women are the ones who, pass on our genes from generation to generation, not men. It is the X chromosomes of women, the mitochondrial DNA of women, that transfer our genes from parents to parents, from offspring to offspring. You can only trace your genealogy through time, through your mother, through her X chromosomes. Because in the eyes of the world, she has 2 X chromosomes. So only she exists. She has 2 X chromosomes. A woman has 2 X chromosomes. That's why only she exists. The men in your genealogy do not exist. We can't trace the genes of your fathers through time. Only through your parents, only through your mother can we find out who you're related to in the past. Only through your mother, not your father. Your father does not exist. In the eyes of gene tracing, your father does not exist. Only your mother does. That word X, 1 and 0, that number 1 and 0 has a lot of significance in this world. 1 and 0, on and off. I and O. People who study computers have, understand the significance of I and O. I'm still dabbling in computers, so I don't have a full understanding of it. But I have enough understanding to know that, 1 and 0 and I and O are very important in computers. They're like the basic ways computers work. They work through I and O, through finite and infinite, through existence and non-existence, because from God's point of view, only God exists. Because God is infinite, because God is everything, only God exists from God's point of view. But from our point of view, because God is infinite, we don't see God anywhere. Because God is everything, we can't see God's full body. God is infinite, so we just ignore God. We ignore God because we can't see his full body. Just like you ignore the infinite numbers between 1 and 0, we ignore God because God is too large. God is too large. His existence is too large. Because God is too large, he no longer exists. Perspective determines what exists and what doesn't in this world. From the perspective of atoms, you don't exist. Only atoms exist. From the perspective of cells, only cells exist. Only things that's at the size of cells exist. We humans do not exist. We are too large for us to exist from the point of view of cells. From the point of view of humans, we don't see God anywhere. So from our point of view, God doesn't exist. This is why many scientists, can confidently claim that God doesn't exist. It's not that God doesn't exist, it's because God is too large. God is infinite. And we always ignore infinity. It is too large for us to understand. We always ignore infinity because it's too large. So infinity no longer exists in our eyes. God no longer exists in our eyes. Yet from God's point of view, it is the equal and opposite. Since God is everything, since God is omnipresent, yet, yes, the Bible states that God is everything. God created the world out of his own body. That means everything in this world is God. Every single thing in this world exists inside the body of God. And because God is everything, God only sees himself. So, you have to understand that God sees things in a different way. God sees you in a different way. God does not see you as a human being, but a part of himself. God will never betray you because God is you. God will never treat you like dirt because God is you. If you die in this world, you will still be God. While you're alive, you're a God. While you're dead, you're still God. God will never lose you because there's nothing to lose. God was never alive to begin with, so how can God die? You were never alive to begin with. You're an illusion. So how can you die? Your very mind itself is an illusion created by God himself. Your very existence is God himself. When you're done in this world, when you're done playing the role of a human being, you will still be God. After you die, you will still be God. And God, never ceases to exist because God never existed to begin with. Nothing exists. That's why everything exists. Existence and non-existence are two sides of the same coin, just like left and right are two sides of the same coin. Past and future are two sides of the same coin. Before and after are two sides of the same coin. Cold and hot are two sides of the same coin. Large and small are two sides of the same coin. Tall and short are two sides of the same coin. Finite and infinite are two sides of the same coin. This is a world of duality. And God, created everything perfectly. That's why it appears imperfect. Because God created everything perfectly. That's why it appears imperfect. Because everything works intelligently. That's why everything appears unintelligent. Because everything, is inside the body of one giant being called God. We don't see him. We don't see God anywhere. So that's it for today's podcast episode. I pray for everyone's future, good health, and happiness. Amen.